Hello everybody. Before we start practicing our argumentative AP style essays to go with our fall unit, and even before we do the practice silly one I talked to you guys about, I want to have you guys look at these videos and about how to tackle the AP language essay, what it kind of looks like, and then I'm going to go over the rubric real quick. And this needs to be done before Wednesday so that we can look at some example essays together to see, what does a strong essay look like, an okay essay look like, and a not gonna do it essay before we start doing our practice ones. Okay, so I'm gonna give you one class day to work on it, and if you don't get it done, then it's homework. Okay, and you need to get it done before we do that, or you're gonna be lost. Okay, here we go.
The final essay in the free response section is called the argument essay. Now, on the one hand, this is the easiest essay of them all, right? There's no sources to read, there's nothing to analyze. If you have some good ideas, you control your own destiny. On the other hand, since there are no sources to read, you control your own destiny. You have to have good examples and good evidence that isn't just describing what someone else does. That's why people tend to score the lowest on this of all the 3 free response answers. We're going to apply the same process to the argument essay that we did for synthesis and analysis. We're going to start by reading the prompt carefully. The prompt is actually your whole text, so you need to read it multiple times and really make sure you understand what key terms they're defining and what they want you to do. And then step 2, instead of reading all 6 sources or closely reading the one, you're going to have to come up with your own examples. You're going to have to be the source for your own essay. Then we're going to write a thesis statement. Just like with synthesis and analysis, you can earn up to 1 point for thesis. You're going to put it at the end of your first paragraph and make sure that it's really clear that you're answering the prompt with a defensible thesis that establishes a line of reasoning. Then we're going to outline our essay. We're going to take all the examples we came up with, choose the best 2 or 3, and really try to work it into a 5-paragraph essay format. And then finally, we're going to write as much as we can. The richer and more specific my evidence, and the more clearly I tie that evidence into the prompt, the more likely I am to earn all 4 of the evidence and commentary points. And finally, by doing that, I can also earn the sophistication point. So the process we follow is exactly the same, except there is no text to read.
Now notice how he said there are no sources given to you, right? So you are your source. This is why we're doing all this reading, especially next year, reading articles and debate, ethical dilemmas and books to help us have something to say. This is the one thing that makes this essay hard, is that if you don't know anything about the subject, that's the danger. So I'm going to also make you read a lot of news articles next year. Oops, but I promise the ones for the fall essays, you can use the fall or the poems or the TED Talk or the video This is Water for all of them. So you've got your sources. Okay, all right, so let's look at the next step.
As always, the first thing I'm going to do is read and analyze this prompt. And as I do, I'm going to remember this is my text. I have to spend all of my time here. So here's what it says. People, companies, and governments throughout the world are now interacting and integrating more than ever. Okay, that makes sense. This multifaceted phenomenon called globalization, okay, so that's what this is going to be about, globalization, continues to grow due to advancements in transportation and communication technologies. So we're globalizing because we can fly and we have cell phones. It results in a widespread exchange of international trade, ideas, and culture. Former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan speaks of the importance of the global market, reflecting broadly shared values and practices and social needs. However, German engineer and economist Klaus Schwab concedes that globalization increases the discord among social classes, which begs the question, is globalization ultimately good for the world? Write an essay that argues your position on whether globalization, sharing economies, ideas, and culture, is ultimately good for the world. So I'm going to bracket this off. This is my task. I need to explain my position on whether globalization is ultimately good. Now, I heard one argument, which was that it helps the global market with broadly shared values, and I heard one very German detractor say that it increases discord among the social classes. So which is it? Or is it some other dimension of globalization that I should emphasize? So here's what's really important, and I really want you to remember this. You don't need to be an expert in globalization to do well in this essay. You don't need a PhD in economics. You don't need to have traveled to 50 countries. You have enough inside of you to do well on this essay. So it says, is globalization good for the world? And it gave me economies, ideas, and cultures. Well, I've been in an economy, and I've had an idea, and I have a culture that I've seen, or maybe two. So I'm going to start with those and think of examples from my own experience or places that I've been or things that I've read that are going to help me answer this specific question. Now, I want to make sure globalization is ultimately good for the world. I want to make sure, too, this is really important, that my answer to this, when I get to my thesis, is not as simple as globalization is always good or it's always bad. Of course, there's some elements of globalization that are good, and of course, there's some that are bad. But it's about, is it ultimately good for the world? So as I think of this, I'm going to think in a complex way, acknowledging that whichever position I take, reasonable people can believe other things on that spectrum. It's not either or, it's not black or white. That's key. Whenever you're approaching the prompt for an argument essay, embrace the complexity that's inside the prompt. Embrace the contradictions.
Okay. Let's move on to the next step, brainstorm examples. Okay, notice how he annotated the prompt just a little bit. You need to do that too. When I see nothing annotated on a prompt, you know what my brain says? Uh-oh, I worry about the essay. Here we go. Step 2.
Now that I've read and analyzed the prompt, I'm ready to start brainstorming some examples. Any good brainstorming list is going to have more than 1 or 2 options. I might have 5 or 6 when I'm done and pick my best few that I can work with. So it asks me whether globalization is ultimately good for the world. And I'm going to think of some examples here. Now, there are examples that are going to pop into everyone's heads, right? Cell phones or Facebook or planes. I could start there, but if I want to show the way I can think in a complex manner, the way that I can show the graders a more innovative approach to this essay, if they're reading 1,000 essays about cell phones, I'll try to get past that. So instead of writing down cell phones and planes, I'm going to think of some other examples of globalization that I know about. It says sharing economies, ideas, and cultures. Globalization. I'm going to talk about, with economies, I can talk about the euro, the currency of the European Union, and how all these countries in Europe banded together and made one currency for themselves rather than different ones. That's just a little bit more specific than saying something like credit cards or something more generic. Globalization of ideas. Globalization of ideas. It's a good cultural phenomenon that isn't a cliche. It's not the, social media is changing us type idea. Sometimes as I'm thinking, I'll go back to the previous thing, international trade, ideas. So here's something that's globalized, actually, is women's rights movements. The idea that women deserve the right to vote, the right to be educated, is an idea that has circulated around the world. It's not just isolated within each individual country. So by talking about women's rights, and how globalization has impacted women, I can talk about something a little bit different than what maybe somebody else might mention. And then cultures. What are some examples in culture of globalization? How might social media or TV change all of us? transportation, communication technologies. Maybe I'll also talk about the spread of the English language. That as we become more global, English language education is more valuable as a language that a lot of people speak. And that's a good thing and a bad thing, maybe. So I'll talk about that as well. Again, I actually already came up with 3 or 4 examples, but I'm trying to stay away from the most obvious. Now here's the thing. I just came up with 3 things that I think maybe have worked pretty well. The euro has been broadly successful. Women's rights have spread around, and that's, I think, a good thing. And the English language, there's some pros and cons, but it's provided a common language for a lot of people. So those are sort of positive. I'm asking whether globalization is ultimately good for the world. And even if I want to say I believe personally that globalization has ultimately been good for the world, it did talk about earlier in here the discord among social classes. So there's some problems with globalization. So maybe I'll make a separate little brainstorm list for problems. 1 or 2 things that have messed up the world because of globalization. So maybe something like globalization, actually related to language, right, has caused the decline of other languages. They're called extinct languages, actually, some of them, because no one speaks them anymore. Because people are being educated in English or in French or some more global international language, their local languages die out. And that's a bad thing, I think. So now I found a way that in talking about English language, diffusing around the world as part of globalization, there's a drawback, which is that local languages, traditional languages die out. And so maybe I can embrace some of this complexity as I think about my thesis. The point is this: there's no better example or worse example. The examples have to be relevant. They actually have to be examples of things that are global or connecting the world in a different way. And I need to be thinking in a complex way of how I can argue that globalization is ultimately good, but that there are some drawbacks as well. This is going to set me up really well when I write my thesis.
Okay, now we're going to move on to step 3 about writing the thesis, which that's what we're going to really practice on with our game and the brainstorming session. So step 2 and 3, that's going to be our game practice to get ready for it. Okay.
I'm ready to write my thesis. I just spent some time really breaking down this question. This question says, I need to talk about whether globalization is ultimately good for the world. I need some specific examples. I've come up with a few, not really any from texts or books that I've read, but from some generic topics here like the euro or women's rights and the spread of the English language. I also found a drawback that the spread of the English language can also hasten the extinction of other languages. So I've got some pros and cons. I have some place to start. I feel like I know what I want to argue. I personally believe that globalization has ultimately been good in spite of the many drawbacks of it. The problem is it doesn't really matter what I think, right? What I have to do is write the essay I can write. And if my examples don't really line up with this, I might want to tilt the thesis a little bit to get something I can finish in time. I think it's always better to just be authentic and completely honest about what you actually believe. But always with that in mind, if I can't defend it well in the 40 minutes I'm given here, I'll write something I can defend well. This essay is not really about your personal opinions or persuading the grader to believe what you believe. It's about getting the task done in the 40 minutes you have. So I need to come up with a thesis that answers the question of whether globalization is ultimately good for the world. And I have these examples of the euro and women's rights and language. Now, a bad thesis is one that doesn't follow what the rubric says. And the rubric here for question 3 for the argument essay is the same as that of question 1, the synthesis essay. I need to respond to the prompt with a defensible thesis that should establish a line of reasoning. So I'm going to say, and here I can use this language of in spite of. So in spite of the many drawbacks of globalization it is ultimately a force for good in the world because, now here I want to get this right, because I'm establishing a line of reasoning. So I'm answering the prompt. I actually borrowed some language from the prompt without just restating it. So a bad thesis would go something like this. Many people believe globalization is a good thing, and many other people believe it is a bad thing. Who knows what the truth is? Or if my thesis does something like, globalization is a complex phenomenon in which people in the world are interacting and integrating more than ever. I just repeated the prompt and presented that as a thesis without responding to it. So I'm responding to it in spite of the many drawbacks, which I'm acknowledging, of globalization. It is ultimately a force for good in the world because, and here I want to think about the examples I'm going to use and try to use the thesis almost to forecast what's going to come in the essay, right? If you're the viewer at home and you want to know what the weather's going to be like in 2 days, it's the thesis statement that's going to tell you. So it's a force for good in the world because globalization helps disseminate positive improvements, such as women's rights and the spread of language education. Now, when I actually write this in my essay, I can refine it a little bit. It's not like the world's best sentence. I can also scribble here. I want to kind of get it right before I move on. But the point is, my thesis cannot just restate the prompt. It cannot be some generic definition. Globalization is a complex thing where many people believe many things, and it has to establish a line of reasoning. It says in the prompt that it may establish a line of reasoning, but you really want to show that off here. So the final result is a thesis that I can use to earn this point as I write my essay. It's also given me a blueprint for how to plan my essay.
All right. Did you guys notice anything in the thesis statement that could have been improved upon? It wasn't perfect as he said. Anybody notice? Yeah, he used the word globalization twice in a small period of time. It might be because he was worried about what the pronoun it was referring to and using that twice. So it's hard to think of a synonym for globalization, so I can understand why he repeated that word to make it clear. But yeah, that's sometimes it's better to just be repetitive if you can't think of another word than get stuck and sit there for 20 minutes trying to find a synonym for a word. Just get it out so you can at least pass this, and maybe you won't get the unicorn point. It's hard to say, but at least, you'll get a good score by just moving on. Don't let stuff like that hold you up. All right, here's step 4, planning the essay.
I'm ready to begin planning my essay. I've got a thesis that I really believe in. It's what I actually believe and what I think I can defend in the remaining 30 or so minutes that I have. So I'm going to take a couple of minutes here, though, to plan the paragraphs more clearly. In the previous essays, in synthesis and in rhetorical analysis, I had just a quick skeleton of Roman numerals. I want to plan this a little bit more because I don't have a text I can go back to, right? When you're writing question 2, when you're writing the analysis essay, you can always go back to that speech or that letter and mine it for more information. Here, I have to mine it from my own mind. I have to come up with the material in advance. So I want to get into more specifics about my structure here. So I'm going to use, in this one, I'm going to use 4 main paragraphs. In my intro, I want to talk about globalization, but I need to go beyond what the prompt does. So I'm going to think for a minute about some broader ways of framing this. I'm talking about women's rights and English language. Maybe I could talk about some background information. Do I know anything about globalization? But you know, I said in spite of the many drawbacks of globalization, so maybe actually what I'm going to do is start with the drawbacks. And some of those drawbacks are economic inequality. Globalization has helped some people more than it's helped other people. The discord among the social classes, that's what Klaus Schwab said that I need to address here, that I'd like to address. And let's see, another one is maybe the economic inequality. Maybe it's, I'll say it's accelerated the disparity, sort of like my first idea, between the West and the rest of the world. So notice what I'm doing. I'm writing a lot more than I did in my last two examples in synthesis and in rhetorical analysis, because I need to have these ideas first. Then I'm going to copy my thesis probably verbatim in. And then in section 2, I'm going to talk all about women's rights. And here I know the history of this pretty well. So I'll start in the 1800s with women's rights movements in the United States, such as the Seneca Falls Convention and the emergence of these ideas in the West, and then talk about how they have become democratized around the world. And that's a good thing. The more countries where women vote and have access to education is a positive outcome for the billions of women who've been affected by globalization. So I'm going to
Now, notice that he knows a lot about the subject, and this sounds like history stuff. Exactly. Use your history stuff, your knowledge from history in these essays also. You don't have to just use what you read in my class. Any knowledge you got from anywhere. Again, this is why we're going to be reading news articles, and I'm going to force you to help you have kind of a general knowledge of what's going on in the world so you have something to say.
do this as kind of a history that gets me to the modern world. And I feel really strongly about this. This is something I can explain in great detail. Then I'm going to talk about what I'm calling here language education. And I'm going to do this as a, following the way my thesis is set up, I'll say sort of in spite of the problems of the diffusion of English and French, that's been a net gain. So I'll do it as in spite of problems, explain the problems, and then talk about the benefits of the spread of English and how it's
And the reason why he's bringing up French is that used to be the international language from all the French colonialism, so it just became English, I don't know, 70s, 80s, something like that. But the reason why we have French in high school still is because that was considered an international language for a long time. That's why my dad took it.
Accelerating the world. And then finally, in my conclusion, I've already twice kind of done a shout out to the other side. Maybe I'll speculate a little bit more about other benefits of globalization. Now, this is tricky. I don't want to introduce things I need to defend at length, but maybe I can almost provide a context for a broader positive view of globalization. So I did it. I have a much more comprehensive plan. After reading the prompt, brainstorming examples, picking my best ones, making them part of my thesis, and I'm ready to write this essay.
Okay, now moving on to the last step, okay, writing the essay. He's going to give you some tips on that part.
I'm ready to write this essay. I've read and analyzed the prompt, I came up with some good examples, got a thesis and an outline. The trick is I don't have any text to refer to, so I have to keep referring to myself. And this is why it's important to slow down with this essay and make sure that you develop a really good introduction and a really good conclusion. A lot of the graders report that they like an introduction that shows right away that you understand the complexity. The prompt itself is organized around complexity. On the one hand this, on the other hand that. By jumping into the debate, by setting up my thesis as I did, as in spite of the many drawbacks of globalization, acknowledging that there are a lot of problems, I'm positioned to take a complex view. This really sets me up for the sophistication point, that sixth point, but also all the other points, the thesis and the main evidence and commentary ones. So I'm going to use my introduction to show my sophistication, to show that I understand that there are multiple points of view. It is literally as simple as globalization is ultimately good or bad for the world, but it's never that simple, right? Because it isn't one or the other, it's a spectrum. And I'm going to position my place on this spectrum as somebody who is skeptical and disappointed with the bad side of globalization, but ultimately optimistic. It's also
And that's why I've been hitting you guys so hard on counter argument and rebuttal. This is how you get the sophistication point. Okay.
important in my concluding paragraph to do a similar thing, to acknowledge complexity, to explain further dimensions of my idea. It's often a really good idea to end that final paragraph, really the entire essay, with a call to action or a rhetorical question. You want to show the graders that this isn't just some blueprint that you memorized, that whether the topic is globalization or something else, you're going to plug in your examples regardless. The graders are looking for an original, authentic essay written in your voice, even if it's not perfect, even if it's not something you had days to prepare for, but something that has real freshness and real originality. So that's why your intro and conclusion are absolutely vital as you write the argument essay.
Okay, now to know what you need to write and what a strong essay looks like, okay, we're going to be looking at examples of that exact prompt that we're going to be grading together, okay, of released student examples that are real students that wrote their essays for this exam for that prompt. And to know how to grade it, we need to go over the rubric real quick. Okay, so as he said in one of the videos, having a thesis gives you 1 point, okay, and you're kind of, that's already halfway there when it comes to grades, right? So if you look at here, you get no points if there's no thesis, right? Or if there's no line of reasoning in it. Okay, that's why I'm adamant that you guys put like reasons why you think what you think. And that helps you kind of guide the organization of your essay too, you know. Or if your thesis is off topic, you can't get the point because of course you're not answering the prompt. Or if it's confusing, right? The syntactically incorrect means like I don't know what you're really saying. Or you're actually contradicting yourself and you don't recognize it, like it's so flawed, it's a problem. But if you have towards the end of the introductory paragraph, right, a thesis that answers the prompt, particularly if it has that counter argument that your thesis is rebutting, right, like in the example, with a couple reasons why you think so or how you're going to argue your point, you're going to get that point. Okay, so make sure it's towards the end of the intro paragraph or they're going to miss it, just like he said. Now for the argument meat, okay, category B, I put this red line here between the pass-fail line, okay. To not get this at all, this is like your evidence was either off topic, right? It says incoherent, like I can't understand you, like it doesn't even follow, or it's irrelevant, you know, totally off topic, or there is no evidence, right? There is no argument, you're just kind of repeating yourself over and over and not really getting anywhere. So that's how you would get nothing. And that's definitely a not pass. You'd get a 1. But let's say you have your thesis, 1 at most, right? You might have a 0. If you have your thesis point, but and you do have some examples or evidence that's relevant to the prompt, but you don't really have enough detailed analysis or commentary, you might just get a 1, right? If it's too brief. Specificity is the key to this. Remember, we kept talking about nuance? That means you need to have details, be specific, don't talk in generalities. All right, so if you have little to no commentary, right, you're just kind of listing evidence and you don't use that evidence to build your own argument, right, that's going to be a problem. And this could be because you don't have topic sentences. So if there aren't strong topic sentences that follow the line of reasoning, you might have a 0 or 1 there because of getting off topic or you're not really having an argument. You're just summarizing some facts and making the reader have to draw the lines between your argument, between your thesis and your evidence. Now, to almost pass, okay, you do have examples that are relevant, okay, and to the prompt, and it does have some commentary, but it's just too brief still, right? It might be oversimplified with these kind of grand, it's all good or it's all bad, with no counter argument, rebuttal, no acknowledgement of other thinkers, right? You might actually misinterpret some of the information that you're using. Like you might totally misunderstand some fact and think it's arguing some point, but it's not. So this is going to be either too simplistic, too brief in its analysis or commentary, or you're just wrong about it, so you can't get that point. And probably you get a 2 if you're in that no acknowledgement of the other side or the complexities, right? Of being too black and white in your thinking, which is a fallacy. Generally, most things, it's a spectrum. Now, when you pass over the red line into the pass zone, providing that you have your thesis point, okay, because 4 is the minimum to pass. Okay, 0, 1, 2, 3, nope. 4, 5, 6, yep. Okay. So the minimum of passing for the AP readers on the test is that you do have evidence that's relevant to the thesis. You do have commentary that explains the relationship between the evidence and the thesis. And it's more than a 2. It's sufficient. You've argued sufficiently. It's not over the top. It's not maybe as detailed as it could be, but you made your case. So it's limited. It might be a little incomplete. It could go further, but you at least supported it more than a 2. And, you did what you had to do to make a decent argument, okay? Now, the difference between a 3 and a 4 here is that it is well developed consistently. Oh, going back to the 3, sorry. It could also be that one paragraph's really strong, the other paragraph's kind of weak. So you have this kind of unevenness. That's what it meant by that part. Forgot to tell you that. So, whereas a 4, it's just complete. All the paragraphs are fully flushed out. You've kind of proven your case. There's really nothing left to be needed to be said to be a solid argument, okay? And we're going to look at examples so we can figure out what's the difference between a 2 and a 3, and what's the difference between a 3 and a 4. I think you'll understand a 0 and a 1 pretty fast, okay? So that consistency, that commentary being explicit, detailed, not just generalized, that's where you're going to get it. And that is the hard part on the argument, because you have to use it all from your noodle and the little bit that might be given in the prompt, okay? Now for the unicorn point, as we have been calling this, that I've been referring to in class, this is where if you can get it if you fulfill any of the requirements here. So to get it, okay, and most likely you won't at the first, okay, but to get that one unicorn point, you need to have something that's such an original thesis, so novel and interesting and nuanced, really showing insight and mastery of what you're trying to say. You could get it for having just and then that you really prove it. It's kind of like, number 1 is like having the 4 on category B become a 5. Like it's just beyond complete. Okay, it's just, wow, I can't believe you wrote that much and had that much knowledge. And this is just something that might happen to you because you got lucky enough to get a prompt about something that you really knew a ton about. So it shows your worldliness and your maturity in thinking. And that's how you get this one. And that's kind of a luck crapshoot kind of a thing. That's why he was talking about not saying something cliche and obvious, right? So this, that's a rare way to get it. But there's other things you could do too. And that's the number 2, situating the argument within a broader context, recognizing the implications of your argument. That means connecting it to the real world. When he was talking about the women getting a right to vote, if you went to town on how that led to a chain of benefits for not only women, but all people on the planet, and you could give examples about how gaining the vote did this and that and the other thing, and you were able to connect it to the real world. This is where history class and reading those news articles are going to help you. That's where you're going to get this point, okay? And number 3, the engaging concession or rebuttal. That's that counter-argument rebuttal, but it can't just be a short little thing. It has to be really well developed. You can't just say, some people disagree with me, but they're just wrong. It's got to be a little bit more. It's got to be more than that. You have to have like a really nuanced, you attack the best argument against you and you really go to town and defeat that other side while being gracious and acknowledging the concerns of the other side, right? So if you do that, a really strong, well-developed counter-argument, and I wonder why we did that with the Antigone paragraphs, you could get the unicorn point for that. Okay. You could also get it from making, being particularly persuasive using rhetorical strategies yourself. Do not worry about this one right now. This is something we're going to be developing all next year. Okay, this is going to be style. I'm going to have you guys go from being able to just write a basic argument to adding panache with strong rhetorical strategies. Okay, and then finally, you can get it from having just such beautiful writing that it's a pleasure to read, and you have such specific language, and you've used those high level words and phrases, and maybe you added that it's just gorgeous to read, or maybe you used a lot of like metaphors and similes and things that were like literary devices that make something beautiful. That's how you can get that point. Okay, so we'll be working on that too with something called voice lessons to all year as warm-ups to help us mimic the masters just with a sentence or two to help us develop our own style. So there'll be a lot of style development next year to turn our basic arguments to something beautiful and persuasive to try to get the unicorn point with either from the 4 or 5. Now, if you have a little bit of any of these things, you're not going to get it. Okay, in my class, I might get you partial points for it, but unless you really lock it in, you're not going to get the point from the AP graders. But for my class, of course, I don't just do whole points like AP does. I do partial points for the grade book. But I will tell you the difference between my grade book points and what the AP people would give you. Okay, so now that we've talked about all this stuff, we're gonna play a game and do a practice essay of silliness, and we're gonna also be looking at the example essays of the prompt from those videos for you guys to be grading and explain why they deserve that score, and then I'm gonna tell you the answers so that we're all what's called normed, and hopefully you have a better understanding of what the expectation is when you start writing the essays for real, when you do the 3 fall ones. Okay, alrighty. I hope you feel excited about mastering this thing and getting college credit next year. Talk to you later, guys. Bye-bye.